What if the US dollar just faced the biggest threat in modern financial history and almost nobody in the West is paying attention? What if suddenly 185 nations had a way of trading without the dollar? And the financial balance of the world began to quietly tilt away from Washington? For almost 8 decades, one currency has dominated world trade, world reserves, and world power, the US dollar. It determines the price of oil, gold, and international loans, and the rules on global banking. It even influences the political behavior of nations. When the dollar moves, the economies rise and fall. And when America applies financial pressure through sanctions or banking restrictions, or through leverage in the IMF, whole governments can feel the sting within days. But today, that era is being challenged. Not by one nation, not by a single regional alliance, but by a fast-expanding, rapidly industrializing bloc of emerging powers, BRICS. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and now, joined by a new wave of energy giants and economic players from the Middle East, Africa, South America, and Asia. A coalition representing more than 45% of the world's population, about 36% of global GDP, and more than 60% of the world's energy production and rare mineral reserves. For years, BRICS leaders have voiced their discontent over a world financial system dominated by the US dollar and institutions such as the IMF, the World Bank, SWIFT, dollar-settled trade mechanisms, a system they claim is in favor of the West, often at the expense of emerging economies. But now, BRICS has made a move that might alter everything. A new international payment system that can operate in 185 countries without using the US dollar. How the new system works. Unlike traditional global banking networks controlled from New York, Brussels, or London, the new BRICS payment system will be designed to allow cross-border transactions, energy payments, currency settlements, import-export payments, banking and clearing, using local currencies, or a new unified BRICS medium of settlement that is presently under development. While the SWIFT system sends messages via Western institutions, the BRICS platform would instead avoid the West altogether to minimize exposure to sanctions, freezing of assets, limitation of access to banking, pressure upon sovereign governments. For the BRICS nations and many in the global South, this is more than economics. It is sovereignty. Why now? This shift did not occur overnight. It was built on the 2 decades of dollar sanctions on Russia, Iran, and Venezuela, increased weaponization of global finance, China, the rise of the world's manufacturing base, India's push for independent currency systems, oil-exporting countries seeking more control over their own revenue, Africa's quest to break free from monetary dependency. But the turning point was in 2022 to 2023, when Russia, cut off from SWIFT, proved something so surprising. A large world economy could survive outside the Western financial network. What began as a crisis became a blueprint. By 2024 to 2025, BRICS leaders were asking a much bigger question. What if the entire developing world no longer needed the dollar? The Western financial model is fragile. For decades, the strength of the US dollar relied on 5 pillars. Dominance of the oil trade, the petrodollar system. US Treasury bonds as global reserves. SWIFT banking monopoly. Western-controlled financial institutions. Global trust in US stability. But oil producers are currently selling in yuan, rupees, and rubles. BRICS nations are reducing treasury purchases. SWIFT is losing exclusivity. IMF and World Bank face growing competition. Trust in US debt management is weakening as national debt passes $34 trillion. A new financial map is emerging, with BRICS paving the way. Who is joining this system? BRICS started off with 5 countries, but their newly established payment system is set to be open to countries wanting to conduct trade without relying on the dollar. That's why, as of today, 185 countries have so far shown interest, signed cooperation agreements, or are already participating. These include oil producers in the Middle East, fast-growing economies in Africa, the resource-rich nations in South America, manufacturing and agricultural powers in Asia. Why is this important? Because for the first time in modern financial history, the majority of global commodities may soon be traded outside the dollar framework. If a country wants to purchase oil from Saudi Arabia, wheat from Russia, microchips from India, lithium from Africa, machinery from China, it may no longer need to route payments via U.S. banks or pay any transaction fees in USD. The energy shift, the heart of the crisis. Oil was almost exclusively priced in dollars for nearly 50 years. This created universal demand for dollars, treasury bond recycling, a guaranteed financial benefit to the United States. But now, Saudi Arabia is considering non-dollar pricing of oil. The UAE is using local currency settlements. Russia sells oil to both China and India in yuan and rupees. Iran is fully outside SWIFT. Both Brazil and China have bilateral currency trade frameworks. In the event that the BRICS nations start offering oil and gas in their own currencies, the foundation of the petrodollar begins to crack. Why 185 countries are interested? Most of the world has one shared problem. Trading in dollars is expensive, slow, and politically risky. Many developing nations are tired of dollar shortages, devaluation crises, high-interest borrowing, IMF structural policies, U.S. sanctions risks. The BRICS system offers an alternative. Heavy checkmark cheaper transactions. Heavy checkmark quicker clearance. Heavy checkmark protection from Western sanctions. Heavy checkmark the ability to settle trade without borrowing dollars. For countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, which have borne the brunt of repeated currency instability, this is not just a financial decision, but a lifeline. How the payment system differs from SWIFT. Whereas SWIFT is essentially controlled by the Western banks as a messaging system, BRICS pursues decentralization, blockchain-backed settlement, central bank interoperability, a unified digital infrastructure. Some member states are even testing a shared BRICS digital currency. Central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. Instant and transparent cross-border trade. This means, if two countries want to trade wheat for energy or machinery for metal ores, their central banks can complete the transaction without the use of the US dollar at all. This is the first serious systemic alternative since SWIFT was created in 1973. The West is watching and worried. This shift is not being overlooked by Washington, London, or Brussels. The U.S. Federal Reserve, U.S. Treasury, and European Central Bank have already noted declining dollar share of global reserves, growing yuan and BRICS settlements, growing non-SWIFT trade networks, increasing usage of CBDCs in emerging markets. Prominent analysts warn, for the first time since World War II, the dollar has a real competitor. Economists on Wall Street are asking an uncomfortable question. What happens if central banks slowly stop needing dollars? And the answer is simple. Dollar demand decreases. Treasury bond financing weakens. U.S. borrowing costs rise. Global financial influence shifts. This is why most Western think tanks define BRICS today not as an economic club, but as a strategic counterweight to U.S. global dominance. The real fear. BRICS does not need to destroy the dollar. It only needs to make it optional. If as little as 20 to 30% of world trade moves out of dollars, the effects will be unprecedented. The U.S. loses unparalleled sanctions leverage. IMF and World Bank face declining influence. Emerging economies become financially independent. Western control over global banking is diluted. And that is why the West is trying to respond, but the network of BRICS grows more quickly than expected. But while BRICS readies its financial revolution, let's not make the mistake of assuming the United States is sitting quietly, watching its global influence melt away. Because if one thing is true about the dollar, it's a survivor. For 80 years, the US dollar has shaped world trade, controlled global finance, and built the power structure we live in today. And Washington is not prepared to watch that power disappear without a fight. So while BRICS is moving full steam ahead with its Unified Settlement System A platform designed to facilitate instant cross-border settlements across 185 countries, for the first time in 80 years, Washington is facing the possibility that the world order it built may not last forever. The question the world is asking. It's not really about currency at this moment. It is about control. Who decides on the rules of global finance? A single nation, or a coalition of nations? Who decides? Which country gets punished? Of the trades mentioned, which one is permitted? Which bank is trusted? The answer was simple for decades. The United States. But what happens when the world has another option? Not theory, not to talk, not meetings, but a working financial system with its own technology, infrastructure, clearing network, payment rails, digital settlement system. That is why this shift is not just historic, is irreversible. If BRICS succeeds and its unified payment system becomes a standard across 185 countries, then the world will wake up to a reality not seen in centuries. Two competing financial systems, two power centers, and two visions of the global economy. But what does this mean for governments, corporations, and ordinary people? Let's break down the impact. How the dollar lost its exclusivity. For 80 years, the dollar was the highway through which nearly all international trade flowed. Whether two countries traded oil, gas, iron, or electronics, the invoices were usually priced in dollars. That meant you needed U.S. banks. You needed SWIFT. You needed the dollar system. BRICS are building the first credible alternate highway. For the first time in modern history, countries have the capability to trade. Without the dollar. Without SWIFT. Without U.S. approval. The dominance of the dollar won't disappear overnight, but that era of uncontested control is over. Who benefits first? Three groups stand to gain immediately. Key cap 1 resource-rich countries. Those countries with oil, minerals, rare earths, metals, and agricultural exports will gain in negotiating power. Why? Because if buyers can pay them in. Local currency. BRICS digital settlement. Multi-currency settlements. Then they are not dependent on just one financial master anymore. This particularly benefits Russia, Saudi Arabia, Nigeria, UAE, Iran, Brazil, South Africa. Natural resource pricing could increasingly move away from the dollar, the first true threat to the financial underpinning of U.S. power. Key cap 2 sanctioned or pressured countries. For nations cut off from SWIFT, this system is economic oxygen. It gives them a way to bank, a way to trade, a means of receiving payment, a way to participate in the world economy. No more financial isolation. Key cap 3 the global south. The countries of Africa, Asia, and Latin America have long lived under financial systems where loans come with political strings, currencies are unstable, trade relies on costly intermediaries, dollar reserves dominate national policy. A BRICS system offers lower transfer costs, instant settlement, direct nation-to-nation banking, less pressure from Western financial institutions. This is why over 80 nations seek either BRICS membership or observer status. They see opportunity and freedom. Who loses? Let's be factual and direct. Key cap 1 United States. Not collapse, not decline, but reduction. If the world uses fewer dollars, U.S. borrowing becomes more expensive. U.S. sanctions lose leverage. U.S. geopolitical reach shrinks. The Pentagon becomes costlier to fund. For decades, the U.S. had a luxury. Print dollars, and the world accepted them. If global demand drops, that luxury fades. Key cap 2 SWIFT and the Western financial institutions. If banks in Asia, Africa, Middle East, South America can settle transactions through BRICS digital rails, then SWIFT loses monopoly. U.S. correspondent banks lose fees. IMF and World Bank lose influence for the first time. Global finance becomes multipolar and not single pole. Key cap 3 countries unprepared for change. Many nations have weak central banks. Poor digital infrastructure. Debt is heavily denominated in dollars. They must adapt quickly or risk being crushed between two competing giants. What it means for ordinary people, this is where reality becomes personal. You may see new digital wallets that can transact across borders, lower international transfer costs, currency volatility, in some markets investment opportunities, in emerging financial rails. You may also experience political pressure, increased financial transparency, more government control over digital payments. This is because BRICS and the U.S. are building digital systems, and digital systems always increase traceability. In the future, paper money may not be king. Code may be the big question, conflict or competition. History tells us something uncomfortable. Major financial realignments seldom occur quietly. When the British pound lost reserve status to the dollar, the world lived through a banking crisis, a currency crisis, a world war. Today, the shift is happening once more, not through armies, but through servers, fiber optic cables, and digital settlement platforms. So what is the road forward? Scenario A. Peaceful transition. The world adjusts to a multi-currency trading system. BRICS and Western systems compete, like Visa and MasterCard. Trade becomes cheaper and more diverse. Competition breeds innovation. This is the best-case scenario. Scenario B. Financial confrontation. In this scenario, sanctions escalate, trade alliances fracture, payment systems become geopolitical weapons. Corporations must take sides. This is less peaceful, and history shows it is possible. Scenario C. Hybrid most likely, competition limited, confrontation slow, steady decline of dollar dominance, rise of multi-currency digital settlement, no fireworks, but a quiet rewriting of global power. This is not a moment about money. It's about who writes the rules of the 21st century. For the first time since World War II, the dollar has a challenger with a rival. SWIFT, the Western financial stake, is not necessarily secure. Whether BRICS succeeds or fails, one thing is sure. The world will never again return to a single system controlled by one nation. Finance, much like power itself, has now become truly global.